The beer that I'm going to show you didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. That doesn't mean it was a bad beer, it's just not how I expected it. What's up everybody, Just Brewing here. Welcome back to the home brewery for another grain to glass video. Today I'm going to shed some light on some mistakes that I made that turned this Blackberry Sour into a Blackberry Wheat. There are a number of ways to sour a beer. You can kettle sour it with lactobacillus. You can use Philly sour, which will actually lower the pH while the yeast is fermenting, which is really nice. It makes it very easy to make a sour. The other easy way is using acidulated malt. Now, that's not something that I've used before. Essentially what you do is you replace a portion of your base malt with acidulated malt, and that was the plan for this Blackberry Sour. Brew day starts with a nice double crush of my grains. On screen now is the grain bill that we're following, but if you're looking for the specifics like my water profile, just check the link in the description. For this 3.5 gallon batch, we start with 4.5 gallons of water. We're going to mash at 148 degrees for an hour. I do add in a handful of rice hulls here and there just to make sure that the wort itself can flow through the mash and it will help drain the mash later on. I break up any dough balls and I add in a secondary thermometer just so I have another set of eyes on what the temperature of the actual mash is, opposed to below the mash where the temperature probe in this kettle is. We're going to be doing a 30-minute boil, and at the top of our boil, we're going to add in our one and only charge of hops, half an ounce of tetanang for 30 minutes. I chill it down and get it into a sanitized fermenter and add Wyeast 1010 American wheat yeast. This is going to be fermenting for about 2 weeks at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. About 7 or 8 days into fermentation, I get it prepped for secondary. This is going to be a fruited sour, and I'm going to be adding Oregon's Blackberry Puree. This is 3 pounds of Blackberry Puree that I'm going to add at the bottom of my secondary and transfer my wort on top of it to make sure it's mixed in nice and even. I siphon my wort on top of the puree and then use the wort coming out of the siphon to clean out the can just to make sure that I get every drop of puree. I want to make sure that I have as much flavor in this as I can. And to do that, I use the wort to clean out the can and then just dump it right back in. Once it's done transferring, I seal it back up and get it back into the fermentation chamber where it will sit for another 3 or 4 days. After a few more days in the fermenter, I keg it, carb it, and get it ready for the tasting. And here you have it in a glass, what should be a raspberry sour. It's a very nice purple color. It's exactly a red and blue mixture. I mean, it looks like you took a raspberry and a blueberry and just mashed it together, and that's what this looks like. I've never had blackberry before, but it was something that my wife wants, so I'm gonna get her blackberry sour. It does smell like a dark berry, and it very much tastes like one too. I think all the flavors are coming through on this, which is a great thing, except the sour. Did you see the mistake that I made? No? That's because I didn't see it either. I had no clue that I made this mistake until about a week after brew day. I did not add the acidulated malt. I know. How is this a sour without lowering the pH? I was really curious as to why my gravity was so off and all my readings were just completely low. I did not consider the fact that I didn't take my inventory correctly. I made the mistake of assuming that the acidulated malt was in the bag with the rest of the specialty malts for this beer. I didn't think about that because I bought them at separate times and it was just in a different bag, and it slipped my mind at the time, and I was wondering why my weight was off. I was like, whatever, it doesn't matter. My gravity was off, whatever, it doesn't matter. I didn't even realize it until I got my first few samples, and it did taste a little tart, and it could have been for a few reasons, but I didn't really notice that it wasn't sour. It was a little tart, just not sour. It's always important to check your list and check it twice. I did check it and I do inventory things on Brewfather, but I didn't really consider that it was just in the other bag. I didn't even think twice about that. I grabbed everything, milled it, and started brew day. Sometimes you just kind of get in the zone and don't think about the small things, and that right there is a lesson to learn. I do need to slow down during brew day. I'm always trying new things, which can get in the way of trying to dial in my process and my equipment, but I'm eager, I'm a go-getter, I really like trying new things, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. That does it for the big mistake that took this beer from a Blackberry Sour to a Blackberry Wheat. There are a few things that I can do better for next time, one of which was cold crashing. Using this puree was super nice and it's really convenient. I've done homemade purees in the past and they work great sometimes, but this is just so much more convenient. It's already sanitized. All you have to do is sanitize the lid and your can opener, get it into a secondary, and you're good to go. Anytime you're adding stuff into your fermenter or your secondary, it's almost always a good idea to cold crash if you can. At the time, I was not able to cold crash. I've been doing double brew days, as I mentioned earlier, and it takes up quite a bit of space in my fermentation chamber, as you would imagine. But I'm not able to drop the temperature of that in order to get it to cold crashing temps. And I don't really have space in my keezer to keep a few kegs or a couple kegs and a fermenter. Really, all I can keep in there is one fermenter and one keg. Trust me, I've tried. Since I wasn't able to cold crash this, I kind of just said whatever and went with it. But my first 2 or 3 solid pours were exactly that, solid. Once the beer got kegged and down to serving temperatures, it essentially cold crashed on its own. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but all the sediment that was in suspension all fell and just clogged the dip tube. So the first few pours were a little chunky, but after that, it essentially cleared itself up and I think it looks good. Now that we got the negatives out of the way, let's look at the positives. 1, I now have 1.5 pounds of acidulated malt here at the house that I can use. It's really nice having grain on hand and I don't mind adding this into the inventory. So whenever I brew my sour next, I at least don't have to grab the acidulated malt for that. One of the other things to consider, it's still a pretty good beer. It's not exactly what I wanted, but it's a good beer. I do wish that I bottled some, and I knew that since I didn't do anything to clarify the beer, bottling it would not have been a good idea. So I decided not to. I do wish I clarified it, whether that's with Biofine. However I would have done it, it would have been nice to have some of this on bottle too. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you liked the video. I never really mind shedding light on the mistakes that I make, mostly so that I don't make it again. So you can guarantee the next few beers that I make, I'm gonna check my inventory and I'm gonna check it twice. Thanks for viewing, Just Brewing. I'm really glad it's not a sour.